Everything's frozen. It's the middle of the winter. I'm dying to garden, but it's just too cold. I think there may be some things going on inside the greenhouse here at Clark Botanic Garden. I'm Carol Trottier, and this is Back to the Garden. Let's go check it out. It's really cold outside, Bonnie. There's obviously no gardening going on, but I'm getting a little itchy to grow something. What's going on in here in the greenhouse?
Well, first I'd like to introduce you to Jim Newman.
Hi, Jim.
He's our horticulturist, and he is our grower for Clark Botanic Garden through our friends, which is the Fannie Dwight Corporation.
But what's going on in here in the greenhouse, Jim?
Right now, my busy season is starting, and my friends often are perplexed when I explain that we really have to start a lot of our seeds now and going forward to the early spring. So the first step in that process is selecting what we want to grow for the coming year. We use a lot of different seed firms, and we order from, I think we had 9 different companies that we ordered from this year. All right, so once you've gotten your seeds, the next step, of course, is to plant them. Now, the planting timing, it depends on the seed. Most of the time, on the average, a lot of common seeds like tomatoes, marigolds, cosmos, basil, you'd start about 6 weeks before what's called the frost-free date, the average frost-free date. Now, there's a little bit of dispute on what the hard date on that is locally, where we usually work around Mother's Day. 6 weeks, counting back from Mother's Day, would be the time to start a lot of the common seeds. That gives us time for the seeds to germinate and then for the plant to get big enough to transplant into the garden when it's warm enough to be done. You now sort your seeds by what date you're going to plant them. And the next thing, of course, is to start the planting process. All right, the first consideration, I guess, in that planting process is what kind of soil you should use. And this is an example of it here. It's kind of a fine soil for seeds. This would be different than I would use for a normal potting mix. That would have a lot coarser material in it. And there are a lot of seed starting kits that are sold in nurseries. And those can be used. They come with a container. They come with the soil. They usually come with a cover to put over the
mini
container,
greenhouse.
like a mini greenhouse.
So you'd recommend don't try to save money by digging the dirt in your backyard.
No, that's just a no. You're going to be disappointed with the results.
The soil also harbors, I think you said before, insects and disease outside. So you don't want to bring that in.
Right.
And next thing, of course, is the container. We use kind of what we call a little flat. About 2 inches deep is what you're going to require to start the seeds. Some people use peat pots. I personally don't like them that much. Some people use little cell packs, or even Dixie cups or egg cartons.
Egg cartons, yeah. I use egg cartons at home.
The key to using any kind of container is that it has good drainage and that you're able to separate your seeds, space them pretty well. Because you don't want to be thinning out the seeds later, picking the seeds out that are too crowded. You want to give them enough space to grow. If the seed is tiny, you really probably don't want to use 1 or 2 seeds in these packs because there's just too much space again. And the roots could be kept too wet.
Like a basil seed that's so fine, or some of the herbs that...
Yeah, what some people do will plant a bunch of them in here, and then they'll have to pick out 9 out of 10, and you're just wasting them. That's why we like something like this, where you can spread out the seeds, space them in here, and you'll get a lot of plants later that you can use separately. Fill it to about 2 inches. Spread it evenly. And make sure that it's even in the whatever you're using, because otherwise the water will tend to go to a low point. And again, you'll get that muddy kind of situation.
What are we growing, Bonnie?
All right, we picked with some pepper seeds. The reason I selected that, even though it's really too early to plant peppers right now, I probably wouldn't plant them till April sometime. The seeds are light colored, so for demonstration purposes, it's easier to see what we're doing.
We do grow a lot of peppers here.
We do grow a lot of peppers. All right, so what I'm doing is I'm evenly spacing maybe about 1 inch apart the light colored seeds, all right, and the spacing on them. All right, the next thing to do is to put appropriate covering on the seeds so that they're protected when they're being watered and the water is uniform. Again, you're going to have to look at what your seeds need. Some seeds need light, so they shouldn't be covered at all. Some seeds are very, very fine, like begonia. It's almost like dust. And if you cover them, they're just not going to germinate well. Some seeds need, as I said, I think I mentioned they need cold treatment or they need scratching or whatever.
Right, like morning glories are, you have to scratch those seeds.
Yes, yes. And some seeds need to be soaked overnight, say in warm water, because the seed coat is so hard that they need that water to just in the soil, the water won't seep in well enough. Typical seed like this, about this size, and kind of the common seed that you'll be growing, you just put a covering, maybe 1/4 inch over the seed. And I actually use a screen when I'm spreading the seed like this.
Almost like a sifter
Like
for
a
flour.
sifter, yes, exactly. And then I'll firm the soil down so that there's good contact between the seeds and the soil. Okay. Now at this point, it's probably also good to put some kind of label in here.
You think
what
you'll
you've
remember.
planted. You think you'll remember, especially if you're planting, say, 4 or 5 different types of tomatoes or something like that. You want to know which one is the beefsteak and which one is a cherry, or what color the marigold is, or whatever. All right.
What do you usually use, Jim? One of these
Yes.
plastic? Oh, so these are seeds that have been germinating and growing how long?
These were started, and another good idea is to date them so you know how long they've been sitting there, because sometimes you won't have germination success, and you want to know when it's time to ditch it.
Right.
These were planted February 6th. The older a seed gets, in general, the fewer seeds are going to germinate. A thing to do is to wrap some seeds in paper towels, put them in a plastic bag, put it in a warm place, and test out how many seeds are going to germinate.
Right, before you get disappointed and plant them all.
And rather than planting a whole thing and after 2 weeks you find out that nothing's coming up.
Do you get excited every year when you start to see the seeds come
Oh
up?
yeah, I keep my fingers crossed when I plant them, and then when they finally come out, I'm happy. So if you're going to put your seeds in a sunny spot or under a plant light that may generate some heat, you can cook your seeds. So you have to be, and when you see the seeds germinating, you immediately take that cover off. They needs air, it needs the water to evaporate. If you let that heat build up under that cover, you could have a disaster. All right, so you've planted your seeds, you've covered them with an appropriate depth of soil, or not, depending on the type of seed that you're doing. Next thing to do is to water. And what we use is kind of a mist nozzle, so it gets a fine watering. Now, why do we do that? Because if you use a heavy flow of water, either from your sink or from a hose, you can wash the seeds out. And this also will prevent the seeds from being soaked as heavily. All right,
So if you're home and you're and you don't have a mister, you'd have to water it a little higher, so that way it won't smack on to the seeds.
Could you use like a hand mister?
Yeah,
Yes.
you can use a spray bottle. That's great.
But not a watering
You
can.
want-
Right.
Most seeds will react well to bottom heat. And the easy way to do that is to get a seed germination mat that draws about 100 watts.
Usually electricity and water don't mix, but I'm not nervous. It's not plugged in.
Yeah, well, it's not plugged in for one thing. But this is kind of a rubberized, I don't know what actually the material is, and there's a cable underneath that heats. It's very safe. And you would actually, and it goes to about 80-something degrees, I think, and you put your flat or your medium on the mat, and it gives it that what they call gentle bottom heat, consistent heat.
And how long does it stay on the
It
heating
stays
pad?
there. I would keep it there until the seeds start to germinate. So we planted our seeds. We have the seed medium and the container on a heat mat. The seeds have sprouted, and this is what they will look like when they start to sprout. These seeds were planted on February 6th, and they now have a set of 2 leaves. These are not called true leaves. They're called cotyledons or seed leaves. All right, they help the seed push through the ground, and the main plants start to grow. All right, so you'll see a lot of references to transplanting, that you should transplant seeds when there are 4 true leaves. And most people mistake these first 2 leaves as true leaves, but they're not.
I didn't know that. I learned
Now,
something
that's
new.
the rule of thumb. I find that if the plant starts getting those 4 true leaves, And they're grown in this type of flat situation. The roots are very, very intertwined and they're a little hard to pick out of the medium. So now say this is growing for another couple of weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, depending on the plant. I'm ready to transplant to another container. I don't want to leave the plants here till I'm ready to put them in the garden, again, because they're just going to crowd each other out. My next step would be to transplant into a cell pack.
Are we using the same kind of soil when we transplant them into the
Good question. All right, the soil that typically used for seed is very fine. All right, because you don't want a lot of bark, you don't want other material in there that would inhibit the growth of the seeds.
You want them to be able to push up.
You want them to push up easily. All right, so what would happen then is that you would now use a different potting mix, one that has more bark in it and may have other things like vermiculite or perlite or whatever in the soil, but a little coarser soil than what you were doing before. Now I'll go from a bunch of seeds together into one seed per cell. And what I do is I have either a penknife or some little thing that's sharp enough to penetrate the soil. I'll just actually go in and pick out each plant individually. I don't want to do it now because I don't want to wreck these plants.
Like a surgeon.
Yes. And I'll go all the way down and I'll lift the plant and those nice little root will come. They'll probably be about this big at this point. And then I'll go to the cell pack, holding my little plant by the leaf, and I'll take a very exotic tool.
Shish kebab.
Yeah, and make a little hole, put the plant in, press the roots down. Surprisingly, the roots are pretty strong, so you can be a little, not super tough with them, but they will move down. And then snug it in.
Very methodical.
Very methodical.
patient
At this
work.
point, it's very tedious because look at this. This is, I think there are 100 seeds here that are growing. So that's when it takes a lot of time consuming and a little bit boring, but
you have to have a gentle touch as well.
Yeah,
so you
also
don't,
have to have a
you
gentle
don't
touch.
squeeze the seedling.
Yes. After a while, this plant will start to grow. These are coleus, and they're a little challenging to start from seed, but it's doable for the home gardener. And these are actually started from cuttings, but this would be kind of the size from a seed that you would grow it to until they're ready to be transplanted to the next.
Into another, which would
Now, how do you know it's ready to transplant? You actually pop it out of the cell
and look at the
and look at the roots. The roots are the key, more than the top. All right, and this is pretty close to being ready to be transplanted. You can see there's a nicely developed root ball. They look healthy, and this probably could stand another couple of weeks in the cell pack before
You just
until
don't
it's
want them
really
to get
crowded.
root bound.
Yeah. All right, so I'm ready now to transplant it to the next size, which would often be a 4-inch pot, 4 inches across. And in doing that, you'd fill it with the medium. You'd rough up the roots. That's important because you leave them in a root ball like this, they're just going to grow within themselves, and you're going to get a stunted plant, and it's going to grow much less vigorously. So you kind of spread out the roots, you put it in the mediums, again, snug up the medium, and in that stage, the plants will stay there quite a while. We're talking a number of weeks.
Until you're ready to plant, you can leave
Until you're
them.
ready to plant, yeah. If you start early and you're a hobbyist and things are getting bigger, once it starts getting cramped again in this size pot, the next size would be like I think this is a 6-inch pot.
By then, hopefully, you could put it outside.
Well, we have to talk about hardening off because that's very
Yes.
important. Because all your hard work that you've done, if you don't put it out correctly, you can kill your plant.
Like, what if it's the first warm day in May and I'm like, oh, good, I could put my plants out, and I go.
No, you don't want to go
from the
directly from the
greenhouse.
house into the ground. When you think the weather has settled and it's time to put out your plants, and you're going to have to make a choice of which plants to put out first. Some are hardier than others. And again, your research through the catalog on the seed packet will give you a hint on when it's time to put out. You don't want to, again, put the plant out right into the garden. You want to use a process called hardening off, taking the plant and moving it outside and in at night, outside in the morning, in at night for, they say 7 to 10 days.
You're acclimating the plant to be
Yes.
outside. Sort of like going out on the first sunny day and getting a sunburn without
Right.
putting any suntan
That's a
lotion
good
on.
analogy.
And how do you harden off 1,000 plants here at Clark? Every morning, you
Every
bring them all
morning
outside?
we'll use Vermont carts. We'll have 6 to 8 Vermont carts that all wheel in and out
in
for
and
out.
weeks. And we'll have to stage it. Obviously, we can't do them all at once. So I'll start with the hardiest plants first, probably probably the beginning of May.
Well, I wish I had my own greenhouse, but I don't, but at least I can come here and visit and get the best advice about starting seeds.
Hello, I'm Judy Bosworth, North Hempstead Town Supervisor. I hope you'll visit us here at Clark Gardens sometime soon, and please bring your gardening questions. Thanks for watching.